My fiancée refused to sell her apartment in case we split, so I put the house in my name only. Her family called me controlling until they saw the prenup she'd already drafted. My fiancée kept her apartment as a backup plan in case our marriage failed, so I told her the house would be in my name only. What I found out next made me realize I'd been the backup plan all along. I need to get this out because I've been called controlling, financially abusive, a narcissist, and about 15 other things by people who don't know the full story. My own mother told me I was being difficult about this. Elena's family has blocked me on everything. Her best friend sent me a 4-paragraph text about how I ruined a good woman's life. I didn't ruin anything, I just paid attention. Let me start at the beginning because the context matters. I'm 34. I work as a structural engineer for a mid-sized firm in Minneapolis. I make around $127,000 a year, which sounds like a lot until you factor in student loans, the cost of living, and the fact that I've been saving for a house for 9 years. I drive a 2018 Honda Accord. I don't have expensive hobbies. I've never been on a vacation that cost more than $2,000. Every financial decision I've made since I was 25 has been aimed at one goal: owning a home. Elena is 31. She's a marketing coordinator at a healthcare company. She makes around $68,000 a year. We met through mutual friends at a wedding in 2021, started dating 6 weeks later, moved in together in January 2023, and got engaged in October 2023. The wedding was supposed to be September 2025. When we moved in together, we rented a 2-bedroom apartment in Uptown for $2,100 a month. We split it proportionally based on income. I paid about $1,350 and she paid about $750. I thought this was fair. She agreed it was fair. We never argued about money. That should have been my first clue that something was wrong, because nobody agrees about money that easily unless someone's hiding something. 6 months into living together, Elena casually mentioned that she still owned her old apartment. I didn't even know she owned an apartment. I thought she'd been renting before we met like I had been. She mentioned it on a Sunday morning while we were making breakfast. Just tossed it out there like it was nothing. My tenant's lease is up in August. I need to decide if I'm renewing or finding someone new. I stopped mid-pancake flip. Your tenant? Yeah, in my apartment, the one I bought in 2019. She said it so casually that I almost didn't process it. Elena owned a 1-bedroom condo in northeast Minneapolis. She'd bought it for $189,000 in 2019 with help from her parents for the down payment. She'd been renting it out since she moved in with me, collecting $1,450 a month from her tenant while paying a mortgage of around $1,100. She was profiting roughly $350 a month, plus building equity, plus getting tax benefits I didn't fully understand because I'd never owned property. I wasn't upset that she owned property. I was confused about why she'd never mentioned it. I guess I just didn't think about it, she said when I asked. It's not like it affects us. Except it did affect us, because we'd had multiple conversations about our financial situations before moving in together. We talked about debt, savings, income, spending habits. I told her about my student loans, $34,000 remaining at the time. I told her about my savings for a house, $89,000 at that point. I told her about my credit score, my retirement contributions, my monthly budget breakdown. She told me about her car payment, her credit card balance, her salary. She'd never mentioned owning real estate worth over $200,000. When I pointed this out, she got defensive. It's not like I lied. You never specifically asked if I own property. That's technically true. I didn't ask, Elena, do you own any real estate? During our financial disclosure conversations. But I'd shared everything about my financial life voluntarily, assuming she was doing the same. The omission felt deliberate. I let it go. People have different ideas about what constitutes important financial information. Maybe in her family, owning property was normal enough that it didn't warrant special mention. Her parents owned 3 properties. Her older brother had bought his first house at 26. Maybe to them, a 1-bedroom condo was barely worth discussing. I let it go, but I didn't forget. Fast forward to March 2024. We'd been engaged for 5 months. I'd finally hit my savings goal of $120,000, which was enough for a 20% down payment on a $500,000 house plus closing costs and an emergency fund. I was ready to start looking. I came home from work one Thursday and told Alina the news. I was so excited I practically ran through the door. "I hit the number," I said. "We can start looking at houses." She smiled, hugged me, said congratulations. Then she said something that stopped me cold. "That's amazing. And once we're married and settled in the house, I'll probably sell the apartment. Maybe in like 2 or 3 years." I pulled back from the hug. 2 or 3 years after we're married. "Yeah, I want to make sure everything is stable first." "Stable meaning what?" She shrugged. "You know, make sure the marriage works out. It's smart to have a backup plan." I want to be very clear about what happened in my brain at that moment. I didn't yell. I didn't get angry. Something just clicked into place, like a puzzle piece I hadn't known was missing. Alina was planning for our marriage to potentially fail. She was keeping an asset specifically as an escape route. She wanted me to buy a house with my savings while she maintained a separate safety net using her property. I sat down on the couch. "So you want me to put $120,000 into a house that we'll live in together, while you keep a fully separate asset that's entirely in your name?" "It's not about the money," she said. "It's about security." "Whose security?" "Mine and yours too, honestly. If something happened, we'd both have somewhere to go." "I wouldn't have anywhere to go. I'd have a house with a mortgage that I couldn't afford on one income, and you'd have an apartment worth $250,000. She started getting frustrated then. "You're making this into something it's not. I'm not planning to leave you, I'm just being practical." "How is this practical? We're supposed to be building a life together. You're keeping an exit door." "Everyone should have an exit door. That's just smart." I asked her what would happen to the apartment rental income once we bought a house. She said she'd keep collecting it. I asked if that income would go toward the house expenses. She said it would go into her savings account, separately, because it was her property and her income. I asked if she expected me to put her name on the house we bought with my down payment. She said yes, obviously, because we'd be married, and that's what married people do. I sat there for a long time without saying anything. She kept talking, explaining how this was normal, how her mom had always told her to maintain financial independence, how she wasn't trying to hurt me, how I was overreacting. I wasn't overreacting. I was finally reacting accurately. "Okay," I said eventually. "If you're keeping your apartment in your name only as a backup plan, then the house will be in my name only. Same logic. We each have our own safety net." Her reaction was immediate and intense. She called me petty. She said I was punishing her for being responsible. She said I was trying to control her by threatening to withhold joint ownership of our home. She said this was a massive red flag about my character. I pointed out that I was applying the exact same principle she'd just explained to me. If backup plans and separate assets were smart and practical for her, they should be smart and practical for me too. She said it was different because she already owned the apartment, whereas the house would be purchased during our marriage and therefore should be marital property. I said the apartment would continue appreciating during our marriage and generating income during our marriage, so by her logic, shouldn't I have some claim to that? She said no, because she'd owned it before we met. I said I'd saved the down payment before we met. She said that was different. I asked how. She couldn't explain how. She just kept saying it was different, that I was twisting her words, that I was trying to trap her somehow. That was the first night I slept on the couch. Not because she asked me to, but because I needed space to think. Over the next few weeks, I tried to approach this from every angle. I suggested we both sell our premarital assets and combine the proceeds into a joint down payment for a house we'd own together. She refused. I suggested she sell the apartment and use the proceeds for her own separate investment while I bought the house in my name only. She refused. I suggested we get a prenup that clearly outlined what belonged to whom in case of divorce. She said prenups were unromantic and showed a lack of faith in the relationship. The irony of that statement, coming from the woman with the backup apartment, was not lost on me. I asked my lawyer friend to explain what would happen if we divorced without a prenup in Minnesota. He told me that assets brought into the marriage would generally remain separate property, but any appreciation during the marriage could be considered marital property. More importantly, any income generated by those assets during the marriage would likely be considered marital income. So Alina's apartment, which she'd owned for 5 years before meeting me, would remain hers in a divorce. but the rental income she collected during our marriage, and the appreciation that happened during our marriage, those could be divided. Unless she had a prenup that protected them. That's when I started wondering if she'd already talked to a lawyer. I didn't snoop through her things. I want to be clear about that. I didn't read her emails or go through her documents. What happened was genuinely accidental, in the sense that I wasn't looking for anything specific when I found it. Alina asked me to print a document for her while she was in the shower. She'd emailed it to herself and wanted a hard copy for a meeting the next day. I opened her laptop, went to her email, and searched for the document she described. The search returned several results, including a thread from November 2023, 1 month after our engagement, with the subject line, Prenuptial Agreement First Draft. I shouldn't have opened it, I know that. But I also knew in that moment that opening it was the only way I'd ever know the truth. The email was from a family law attorney named Patricia Sheldon. Attached was a PDF document, 17 pages long, titled Prenuptial Agreement Draft for Review. I read the entire thing. The proposed prenup, which Alina had apparently commissioned and paid for without telling me, was structured almost entirely in her favor. Here's what it said. Her premarital assets, including the apartment, would remain entirely separate property. Any appreciation, rental income, or proceeds from sale would be hers alone. My premarital assets, including my savings, would also remain separate, but here's the key part, only if they weren't commingled with marital assets. The moment my down payment went into a jointly owned house, it would become marital property subject to division. If we divorced within 10 years, she would be entitled to 50% of any increase in the home's value, regardless of the proportion of down payment contributed. If I stayed home with children for any period, my separate assets would become at risk for division. If she stayed home with children, I would owe her compensatory payments calculated based on her lost earning potential. Her retirement accounts would remain separate. My retirement accounts would remain separate unless we had children, at which point they'd become partially marital. Infidelity clauses applied only to me. If I cheated, I'd owe her a flat payment of $100,000 plus 60% of all assets. If she cheated, there were no financial consequences. The agreement also included a clause stating that any gifts from her family would remain her separate property, while any gifts from my family would be considered marital property. I read it 3 times because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. This wasn't a prenup designed to protect both parties. This was a document designed to ensure that Alina walked away from our marriage with everything she brought in plus half of everything I brought in, while I walked away with nothing but my separate retirement account and the knowledge that I'd been thoroughly played. She'd had this drafted 1 month after our engagement, while we were celebrating with her family, while we were booking venues and looking at rings, while she was telling me how excited she was to build a life together. She'd been building an escape pod. I closed the laptop. I went to the kitchen. I made coffee. I sat at the counter and waited for her to get out of the shower. When she came out, she was cheerful. "Did you print my document?" "Yeah, it's on the printer." "Thanks, babe." She kissed my cheek on her way past. I didn't say anything about the prenup. I needed time to think, and I needed to talk to my own lawyer first. My friend Marcus referred me to an actual family law attorney named David Chen. I met with David 2 days later and showed him the draft prenup I'd photographed on my phone. David's reaction was professional but clear. "This is extremely one-sided. No reasonable attorney would advise you to sign this." "She hasn't asked me to sign it yet. She doesn't know I've seen it." "So she's planning to present it at some point, probably closer to the wedding when there's social pressure not to back out." He leaned back in his chair. "Walk me through the timeline again." I told him everything. The apartment revelation, the backup plan conversation, the fight about the house title, the prenup draft. "Here's what I think is happening," David said. "She wants you to buy a house with your savings, put her name on it, and then present you with this prenup that protects her apartment while making your house vulnerable. If you refuse to sign it, you're the bad guy who doesn't trust her. If you sign it, she's legally protected in ways you're not. And if you never see it and you don't get a prenup at all, the house becomes marital property by default while her apartment stays separate because she owned it before marriage." "What do I do?" "That depends on what you want. Do you want to save this relationship?" I thought about it. I really thought about it. I'd loved Alina for almost 3 years. I'd planned a future with her. I'd imagined children with her, growing old with her, building something that mattered. But I also saw, clearly now, that she'd been playing a different game the whole time. She'd been positioning herself for maximum gain and minimum risk. She'd been treating our relationship like an investment portfolio that needed hedging. I don't think there's anything left to save, I told David. But I also don't want to just disappear. I want her to understand what she did. David nodded. Then let's think about how to do this properly. We came up with a plan. It wasn't about revenge, though I'll admit it felt satisfying to execute. It was about clarity. It was about making sure Alina couldn't spin this into a story where I was the villain who abandoned her without explanation. Step 1, I would suggest we see a couples counselor to work through our communication issues about finances. I'd frame it as wanting to save the relationship. Step 2, in counseling, I would ask about the prenup, not accusingly, just curiously. Have you thought about whether we should get a prenup? What would you want in one? Step 3, whatever she said, I would have documentation of her response. Either she'd admit to already having one drafted, in which case I'd know she was willing to be honest. Or she'd lie and say she hadn't thought about it, in which case I'd have proof of her dishonesty. Step 4, based on her response, I would make my decision about whether to proceed with the relationship. The counseling appointment was on a Wednesday evening. The therapist's name was Dr. Michelle Okonkwo, and she had 17 years of experience with premarital counseling. I'll summarize the session because most of it isn't relevant. We talked about our communication styles. We talked about family backgrounds and expectations. We talked about how we envisioned our financial life together. Then, about 40 minutes in, Dr. Okonkwo asked us directly, "Have either of you considered a prenuptial agreement?" Alina said no. She said she thought prenups were unnecessary for couples who trusted each other. She said she'd never even looked into what a prenup would involve. She looked me right in the eye when she said it. I let a long silence pass. Dr. Okonkwo waited. Alina started to look uncomfortable. "That's interesting," I said finally, "because I found the draft you had drawn up in November." Alina's face went through about 6 different expressions in 2 seconds. Confusion, then recognition, then panic, then anger, then something that looked like fear, then a forced calm that wasn't convincing at all. "I don't know what you're talking about." The 17-page document from Patricia Sheldon, the one that protects all your assets while making mine vulnerable, the one with the infidelity clause that only applies to me. Dr. Okonkwo leaned forward slightly. Alina's hands were shaking. "You went through my email. You lied to me for months about something that would fundamentally affect my entire financial future. I was going to tell you when, the week before the wedding, the day before." She didn't have an answer for that. The session devolved from there. Alina cried. She accused me of violating her privacy. She accused me of looking for reasons to leave. She accused me of never really loving her if I could do this to her. Dr. Okonkwo tried to mediate, but there wasn't much to mediate. The facts were clear. Alina had drafted a one-sided prenup without telling me. She'd lied about it directly when asked in a therapy setting. She'd been planning to either present it under pressure or never mention it at all, depending on what benefited her most. I ended the engagement that night. Not in the therapist's office. I didn't want to put Dr. Okonkwo in that position. I waited until we got home. I can't marry someone who's been building legal protections against me while telling me to trust them completely, I said. The apartment backup plan bothered me, but I could have worked through it. The secret prenup is something else. That's not caution, that's manipulation. Alina begged me to reconsider. She said she'd tear up the prenup. She said she'd sell the apartment. She said she'd do whatever I wanted. I asked her why she'd drafted it in the first place. My mom suggested it, she said. She said I needed to protect myself. Protect yourself from what? From me. From losing everything if things went wrong. So you were planning for things to go wrong, from the beginning. She didn't deny it, she couldn't deny it. The evidence was too clear. I moved out that weekend. I stayed with Marcus while I looked for a new apartment. Alina kept the rental we'd shared. It was in both our names, but she'd agreed to take over the full payment until the lease ended. Then her family got involved. Her mother, Sandra, called me 3 days after I moved out. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't ask for my side of the story, she just started talking. I always knew you weren't good enough for her. She deserved someone who would appreciate her, not someone who'd abandon her over a minor disagreement. A minor disagreement? She had a lawyer draft a prenup that would have entitled her to my assets while protecting hers, and then she lied about it directly to my face. That prenup was for her protection. You don't understand what women go through in divorces. We have to plan ahead. I would have been happy to plan ahead together. I suggested a prenup. She said no, that prenup showed a lack of trust. Then I found out she'd already had one drafted behind my back. That's different. How is that different? She couldn't explain. Just like Alina couldn't explain. They had a conclusion they wanted to reach and no logic to support it. Alina's father called next. He was more measured but still clearly on her side. Son, I think you're making a mistake. Alina loves you. Whatever happened with the prenup, I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation. The explanation is that she wanted to protect her assets while gaining access to mine. There's no other way to read that document. Marriage is about compromise. Maybe the prenup was too aggressive, but the underlying instinct to protect yourself isn't wrong. I agree, which is why I suggested the house be in my name only, the same way her apartment was in hers. She called me controlling for suggesting exactly what she was already planning to formalize legally. He went quiet for a moment. I didn't know about that. There's a lot you don't know. Did you know she's been collecting rent on the apartment while paying below her share of our living expenses? Did you know she wanted that rental income to go entirely into her savings while I paid for the house? Did you know her prenup had an infidelity clause that only applied to me? That doesn't sound like Alina. Read the document. It's 17 pages. I'll send you a copy. I didn't actually send him a copy because David advised against it, but the offer was genuine. I wanted them to understand what she'd done. Her brother, Kevin, was the worst. He didn't call. He showed up at Marcus's apartment. I came home from work to find him waiting in the parking lot. He was a big guy, 6'3", probably 240 pounds. He worked in construction and looked like it. We need to talk, he said. About what? About why you're treating my sister like garbage. I'm not treating her like anything. I ended a relationship after discovering she'd been financially scheming behind my back. That's it. That's not what she says. I'm sure it's not. What does she say? She says you went through her private documents, violated her trust, and then dumped her publicly in front of a therapist. I discovered documents she'd hidden from me. I confronted her about them in a confidential therapy session where we'd agreed to be honest with each other. She lied to my face. I ended things privately at home, not in front of the therapist. Kevin stepped closer. You're lying. I have recordings from the therapy session. Minnesota's a one-party consent state. I have proof of every word she said and every lie she told. This wasn't actually true. I hadn't recorded anything. But Kevin didn't know that, and his reaction told me everything I needed to know about what Alina had been telling people. He backed off, not completely, but enough. This isn't over, he said. Yes, it is. I'm not marrying your sister. I'm not paying for your sister's backup plan. I'm not signing away my financial future because your mother taught her that men are ATMs with expiration dates. It's over. He left. I didn't hear from any of her family again for almost 3 weeks. During that time, I bought a house, by myself, with my own money. A 3-bedroom colonial in a suburb of St. Paul, listed at $485,000, which I got for $467,000 after negotiation. I put down $93,000 and financed the rest. My name, only my name, on every document. The day I closed, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: peace. This was mine. Nobody could take it from me. Nobody was planning how to divide it before I'd even moved in. Alina found out about the house because someone from our old friend group mentioned it on social media. She texted me for the first time since the breakup. So you were serious about buying without me? I was always serious. You just didn't believe me. I thought you were bluffing. I thought you'd come back once you cooled down. I found a 17-page document explaining exactly how you plan to financially exploit our marriage. There's no coming back from that. I wasn't going to exploit you. I was protecting myself. By taking half of everything I brought to the marriage while keeping everything you brought. That's not protection, Alina. That's extraction. She didn't respond for 2 hours. Then, my lawyer is drafting papers. Papers for what? We're not married. We have no shared property. We have no shared debt. There's nothing to divide. For the ring, it cost $14,000 and I want half. I actually laughed out loud. The ring had cost $8,200, which I'd paid for entirely from my savings. She wanted half of an inflated number for a ring she was legally required to return because she'd been the one at fault in the breakup. I sent her a screenshot of the receipt and a link to Minnesota law regarding engagement rings. The ring is legally mine because you caused the breakup. But you know what? Keep it. Sell it. Put the money toward your apartment's property taxes. Consider it severance pay for the 3 years you wasted. She didn't respond to that either. The final chapter came about 2 months later. Alina had started dating someone new. I heard about it from mutual friends, which was fine. I'd started dating too, cautiously, not seriously. Life was moving on. Then one of our mutual friends, a woman named Dina who'd stayed neutral throughout the breakup, called me with some interesting information. I thought you should know. Alina's been telling people that you financially abused her. Financially abused her how? She says you controlled all the money during your relationship, that you made her pay bills she couldn't afford, that you interrogated her about her spending, that you refused to let her have any independence. I let that sink in. Alina, who'd owned a $200,000 apartment, collected $1,450 monthly in rent, paid less than her proportional share of our living expenses, and secretly drafted a prenup to protect her assets while claiming mine, was telling people I'd financially abused her. That's the opposite of what happened, I said. I know, I was there. I remember you splitting everything fairly and her complaining that you were too generous when you paid for things. Dina paused. I thought you should know because she's telling this to everyone, including some people at your company. My company? She knows someone in your HR department, one of her sorority sisters. She's been talking. I went cold, not angry, just cold. This was Alina escalating in a way I hadn't anticipated. Who in HR? Dina gave me the name, Rachel Tompkins. I'd met her at a company event once. She worked in benefits administration. I contacted David Chen the next day. Can she do that? Can she just spread lies about me to my employer? Not without consequences. If it's defamation and it affects your employment, you have grounds for a lawsuit. He thought for a moment. More importantly, you have documentation that contradicts everything she's claiming. Financial records, the prenup, the therapy session timeline. If she's saying you financially abused her, you can prove the opposite was true. I don't want to sue her, I just want her to stop. Then we send a cease and desist. Formal notification that any further false statements will result in legal action. Usually that's enough to make people back off. We sent the letter. I also went to my own HR department and proactively reported the situation. I gave them the basic facts. Ex-fiancée spreading false information. I have documentation proving the claims are untrue. I want to ensure this doesn't affect my professional standing. They were surprisingly supportive. Apparently, this wasn't the first time someone's personal drama had tried to infiltrate the workplace. They assured me they'd note my file with the context and that any complaints would be investigated fairly. The cease and desist worked. Alina stopped talking to my coworkers. She stopped posting vague accusations on social media. She stopped trying to poison my reputation. But the damage to her reputation was just beginning. Because once I proactively shared my side with key mutual friends, the actual documentation, not spin, the story spread. People started looking at Alina differently. The same women who'd initially called me controlling started asking questions. The same friends who'd taken her side started wondering why she drafted that prenup. Her new boyfriend, from what I heard, found out about the whole thing about 4 months into their relationship. Someone showed him the prenup. He ended things within a week. I don't take joy in that. I don't take joy in any of this. I wish I'd married someone honest. I wish I'd found out sooner. I wish 3 years of my life hadn't been spent as someone's financial fallback. But I'll say this, I'm glad I said the house would be in my name only. That one sentence, that one boundary, that one refusal to participate in a system designed to exploit me, it cracked open everything. It forced her to reveal what she'd been planning. It showed me who she really was. I bought my house. I painted it the colors I wanted. I filled it with furniture I chose. I'm sitting in it right now, typing this, in a room that's entirely mine. Alina still has her apartment. Last I heard, she's living in it again, single, with her backup plan firmly in place. I hope it keeps her warm at night. I hope it holds her when she's sad. I hope the rental income she would have collected is worth more than what we could have built together if she'd just been honest. I don't actually hope any of that. I don't care at all. And that, more than anything, tells me I made the right choice. The house is in my name only. The future is mine to build, and nobody is keeping a backup plan against me ever again. There's an update I should add. About 6 months after everything ended, I got an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line was, "I owe you an apology." It was from Sandra, Alina's mother. She wrote 4 paragraphs. The gist was this: Alina's younger cousin had just gotten engaged. Sandra had given her the same advice she'd given Alina: protect yourself, keep separate assets, draft a prenup early. The cousin had shown the advice to her fiancé. He'd walked away. "I'm starting to think I've been teaching the women in this family the wrong lessons," Sandra wrote. "I taught them to prepare for failure instead of preparing for partnership. I taught them that men were adversaries to be managed, not partners to be trusted. I don't know if you'll believe me, but I'm sorry. Not just for what Alina did, but for the role I played in creating the mindset that led to it." I didn't respond for a week. I wasn't sure if I should respond at all. Eventually, I wrote back. I told her I appreciated the apology. I told her I understood that her advice came from a place of wanting to protect her daughter. I told her that protection isn't wrong, but deception is, and that the issue was never the prenup itself, but the secrecy and inequality of it. I told her I hoped Alina would find someone someday, and that when she did, she'd approach the relationship with honesty instead of strategy. Sandra wrote back one more time. "She's in therapy now, real therapy, not couples counseling. I think she's starting to understand what she lost." I don't know if that's true. I don't know if Alina is capable of the kind of self-reflection that would require. But I hope so. Despite everything, I hope she figures it out. Because here's the thing about backup plans: they work. If you spend your whole relationship preparing for it to fail, you'll always be ready when it does. But you'll also be the one who makes it fail. You'll be the one who couldn't commit fully because you always had one foot out the door. Alina had her backup plan. It cost her everything else. I didn't have a backup plan. I had a boundary, and that boundary saved my life.